Alright, peace and greetings YouTubers. So I wanted to have a music discussion on this channel, mainly because there's been an article that's been floating around social media. The article is coming from Billboard.com and it is entitled, "Pop Stars Aren't Popping Like They Used to. Do Labels Have a Plan?" I'm going to post the link to that article in the description, but it is Billboard.com, so they do have a paywall. But I will talk about what is in the article while we have this discussion. So, in the article, it pretty much talks about how a lot of record label executives are a bit stressed out because they are having a very hard time breaking in new artists, in addition to the fact that there's already a challenge to sustain the artists that are already somewhat commercially successful. And so in the article they talk about how there's been a lot of hit and miss with breaking in new artists, and sometimes there's an artist that blows up like an Olivia Rodrigo or an Ice Spice, and then there's other moments where there's artists that they've put money behind and they don't get the same results. And so it kind of just talks about that because, again, recognize that when a lot of new artists do not break in successfully, there's less money to go around. And if the mainstream artists that are already commercial also aren't doing the same numbers they were once doing, then again, there's even less money to go around. And when there's less money to go around, there's jobs that are cut. And depending on what happens, sometimes you see labels fold. And we've seen the merger of a lot of labels over the last 10, 15 years. So when you're talking about the difference in major labels 30 years ago versus today, what we have today is a fraction of what was once there. And so the whole industry is just going through a shift. And so in the article, they talk about that. They talk about the fact that the industry feels very stagnant right now, where, again, it's very touch and go with the flow, not really sure what the next wave is, but every now and then there's a moment that's a highlight in the industry where there's an artist or two that blows up, but everything else, they keep throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks, and a lot of stuff is just not sticking. So that's kind of the conversation about the industry being very stagnant, where it's just not very eventful right now. There's not a lot of events that take place that keep the masses talking throughout the year. There's a moment here and there, but there's just not a lot. So there's that. They talk about the decline in mass media in regards to how it impacts the music industry when we're talking about radio, when we're talking about television. They even talk about TikTok and how TikTok is a very uncertain and something that's not guaranteed in regards to marketing. Sometimes they'll put all their money behind an artist and really push them and let TikTok kind of be a mainstream outlet for marketing, and that artist doesn't blow up. But then on the flip side, another artist who may not even be signed to a label blows up on TikTok. And then even with TikTok, the conversation of what do you do with an artist that does have a song that blows up on TikTok? Is this going to be an artist that has staying power, or is this another one of the 850,000 artists that are hot for the moment, and by next week society has moved on to something else? So they talk about that. They also talk about the fact that hits don't have the same impact they once had, just 20, 30 years ago, where we're watching all of these artists get #1 hits or top 5 hits or top 10 hits, but the songs come and go so quickly. There's not a lasting impact. There's not a legacy to the songs. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that most of the time the accolades that are coming with some of the acts that are out today, it normally comes from one small demographic of people that spend a lot of time on the internet. So when you're talking about hits having an impact commercially, that idea of a collectively shared experience for consumers is not really a thing right now. The music industry kind of exists in a bunch of different pockets and different realms, and it all depends on how you consume music. And so I want to just jump into a conversation. I have a few points I want to make. I don't know how long this video is going to be. I'm going to just talk till I feel like I've said everything I need to say. So just understand, we might be here for a minute. But I wanted to start with this. I've said for a really long time on some of my other music-related videos that I've always felt that the music industry has always been in a space where they had to play catch-up to whatever happened in the world, or whatever technology had come out. They were always in a space of playing catch-up and in a space of being reactionary rather than being ahead of the curve. And so a perfect example could be what we saw with Napster and how we would eventually see the rollout of peer-to-peer sharing, where people could pretty much just, share whatever music files they had in their computer with somebody 3,000 miles away in another country. And before you know it, you have tens of millions of people who are downloading music for free and enjoying everything, right? So when we talk about the emergence of Napster, the industry knew for a really long time, the conversations had been there that, hey, the internet is going to be a thing that changes the landscape of how we consume music. But when you talk about the music industry from 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, music labels weren't really too pressed because those are some of the most profitable years in music history ever. They were making all kinds of money. So for a lot of people, they were like, oh, it's going to be a fad. It's nothing to worry about. People that really have an appreciation for music are always going to buy it. We don't have to worry about Napster and those other things. And so as time would progress, something like Napster blows up, right? And now people are starting to see their bottom lines affected. And with that being said, because of course there's the big lawsuit with Napster, but at that point, the can of worms has been opened. And now you're seeing additional platforms that also do the same service. So we see the emergence of Kazaa and LimeWire and BearShare and WinMix and all of these different platforms where people can, again, get music for free. And so now you watch the industry try to scramble to figure out how do we catch up to this? Because again, if somebody has the option to download music for free, and mind you, the internet is also changing. We're also transitioning from dial-up to broadband and high-speed internet. So even when it comes to downloading music, at first I think a lot of people weren't too worried about it, because when people were still on dial-up, hey, it might take you a few hours to download one song. But as we transition into broadband, you do a mouse click and 2 seconds later the song is downloaded, right? And so they're starting to see peer-to-peer sharing pick up and gain traction, and now it's starting to affect revenue. And so they try to scramble and try to figure out how can we catch up to this. And so around the same time, we start to see what you would call the emergence of the digital music era, where now you can purchase songs online. We get the iTunes store, we get the Amazon store, and so they try to find ways to combat peer-to-peer sharing. Digital sales and the digital industry somewhat works to an extent, but the other problem is because the internet evolves so fast, people are finding additional ways to get music even faster. And at this point, you've also seen things like torrent sites come out, right? Where people can just get whole albums. And so, blog sites and everything. There's all different platforms where people can just get more and more music faster. So with digital sales being what it is, it works to an extent. But again, the industry has to catch up and say, how do we still combat this bullet train that's going so fast? And so, boom, we get the introduction of streaming. And you get all of these different corporations that are all fighting and clawing, trying to be the first one. You had Rhapsody, going to streaming. And then eventually it would be Apple Music and Spotify and Tidal that would be the main outlets for streaming. And so now we're in the space of streaming. But like I was saying, everything has always been from a reactionary standpoint. So even with streaming, as it's finally starting to gain traction and become profitable, it took years to catch on because, again, it had to catch up to a speeding bullet. And with that being said, even the idea of streaming is very different from the music industry when we talk about the physical era where people still went and bought records. Again, streams do a lot, but streams just don't sit in the same boat as when somebody goes and spends, if we talk about 1995, somebody spends between about $13 and $27 on a physical album, depending on whether or not it's a double disc. The kind of money that comes from one person just buying that, it takes a whole lot more mouse clicks and streams and ad revenue to make up that same $27 through streaming, through tons and tons of people as opposed to one person who went and bought an album. So it's always been very reactionary. But I want to go even deeper because it's not just something that took place in modern times. Even when you go back to the early remnants of the American music industry, we can go to the 1940s. So let's take a road trip, shall we? So we go back to 1941, right? What's happening in the world? It's World War II. It's a terrible time. We lose over 400,000 American troops. Tens of millions of people have been killed during this war. People want escapism. People want to get away from the terrors of what is a world war, right? Violence and bombings, people don't want to hear that all the time. So people find outlets to give them some element of euphoria. What do? They start to consume more music. And so my first example of, again, the music industry being in a space where they're behind the ball is when we talk about what happens between 1941 and 1945. The consumption and revenue of music sales in regards to vinyls doubles between 1941 and 1945. There's just one problem. There is an ingredient called shellac that is used to make these vinyls. So as there's this crazy demand for more vinyls, the thing is this: shellac is made in Singapore.
I was shown the mixing of the materials that go into the disc you hear at home. Ingredients gathered from the farthest corners of the earth. The materials are processed in one of the largest and most intricate machines I have ever seen.
Now, Singapore at that point was pretty much occupied and was under the control of the Japanese. Now, let's remember, folks, what happened with the Japanese during World War World War II. We've just had Pearl Harbor happen, right? And so the United States, no one wants to give any kind of revenue to support the war that Japan is fighting against the United States. So now there's no way to get more of this shellac, because one of the issues is the majority of the shellac only came from one place, Singapore. So what does the industry end up having to do? They have to reuse old vinyls to make new ones. So even the quality of vinyls that would have come out during this time period were of a lesser quality because they were reusing old vinyls, melting them down, and making new ones. And so that's kind of, again, a space where the industry had to be reactive. They're watching the sales and the consumers and everything double, but they don't have the resources to keep up with the demand, and they didn't have a long-term plan. And so it's kind of like, well, what do we do? I guess we'll just go ahead and take these old records nobody bought and melt them down and make some new ones. So that's one aspect. But it gets even deeper because around this time, people consume music a little bit differently, especially when we talk about radio. This is the era where big bands are still really popular, where when you listen to the radio, it's not really vinyls or records that the disc jockey is playing. It's more so they're in a live hall, they're in a theater, or if it's a radio station that has a big giant studio, there might be a live band in the studio. But a lot of times they are at an actual live performance. And it's a full band of 10, 15, 20, 30 people. Brass section, horn section, percussion, all these different things like that. Xylophones and everything like that. Because this is the era of big band swing music. People want to dance and, swing the girl around and all that kind of stuff. It's that era. And so a lot of time, when people heard music on the radio, they were hearing live recordings as they were happening in real time. It wasn't playback. But at the same time, as we talked about, again, the consumption and the purchasing of vinyls doubling in that time period, radio jockeys are like, you know what? It's actually easier if we just go ahead and pay how much we pay for this vinyl and just play that over the air, as opposed to trying to bring in this big old band and they got to set up the equipment and we got to get the amps and the sound right and all this, and we don't got to worry about the conductor having a cold and he can't come in and somebody in the band had to go to the bathroom, so now we got to delay and wait till everybody's ready, or I don't know, there was a fight that broke out at the hall and so the band got to stop and it's on live air, so they don't got to worry about that because they can just play the vinyl. And so here's the thing, at that point in time, a lot of musicians in these big bands, they made their revenue from the airplay that came from those live performances on radio. So a lot of the big bands were getting stressed out because at this point, radio jockeys are really starting to transition from having the big bands play and do that live to let's just play the vinyl because it's easier. And so you have what you call the American Federation of Musicians, right? So that's pretty much the musicians union. And so they're like, something needs to be done because our musicians are losing money because the radio jockeys, they're just pretty much at this point, they're cutting our money. They're playing with our money because we're not getting paid now because they're not playing, we're not getting booked. They're just spinning these little records here, and there's no way for us to have our livelihood. And so again, this conversation of, again, the music industry in a battle to adjust to new technology, but still being in a way where everybody can be in a space where they're happy and everybody's good as far as the artist, the creator, the labels, and the consumer. And so what ends up happening is you have this man named James Petrillo. And so what's interesting is August 1st is such an interesting date, all right? So on August 1st of 1942, he implements a recording ban, right? Which pretty much means there will be no new recorded music, period. And this is for all of the musicians. And this is one of the reasons why I say it's interesting, right? So the reason they did that was because, again, as consumers and everybody, they start shifting to the vinyls and the vinyls are being played on the radio. Again, consumers, just like us in modern times, at some point you may get tired of hearing the same thing, so you want something new. And so the idea was, if we can stop them from recording anything on vinyl, eventually consumers will get tired of hearing those same songs played on vinyls over and over because no new music is being recorded, and eventually they'll say, we want more. And so boom, this is how the big bands will get back into the space. In addition to that, with the band, what would also happen is that he wanted to pressure record labels to give music royalties to musicians that had lost money because of the influx of vinyls. So that was a part of the stipulation in regards to this music ban. And the third portion was that they would pressure a lot of nightclubs to not use jukeboxes. If you don't have a live band and you're using a jukebox, you're working against a musician and you're killing the music industry. And so this ban would go on for 2 years, right? This would go down until about 1944. So again, like I said, August 1st is a very interesting date because that was the date of the music ban. And also when we get to 1981, that was the emergence of MTV. August 1st is also my birthday. Such an important day. But anyway, so again, that example of how the music industry is always playing catch up to advances and things that change over time. And so I feel like that's always been one of the main causes for some of the setbacks we see in the industry. But I want to go back to modern times because I think there's a bit more to say in regards to some of the things that I think affect the music industry in a negative way. Now, before I get into a lot of the beefs that I actually have with the music industry, because to be fair, the music industry has always been the music industry. There's always been some shenanigans and nonsense for as long as the music industry has been here. However, I do think there was a point in time where there was a better balance of labels trying to meet their bottom line, but still give quality music and put out quality artists. At this point, I think they're just throwing anything at the wall and hoping something sticks, and they're going to make sure they still get their check at the expense of the consumer. And so I think that's where we're at right now. But before I even get to that, I do think, in all fairness, you have to also have a conversation about how the structure of just how we consume music and how it's a part of our daily lives has changed. Because in my personal opinion, I feel that there's no longer a collectively shared music experience. Like, I think we're just in a space where everybody kind of just does their own thing. We're all in our own worlds. And so I just want to go a little bit deeper. The other day I was at the gym, And I was so pissed because my phone freaking died. So I was like, dang it, man. So that meant I couldn't listen to the music that I wanted to hear, right? You know, I had my own playlist. I got a whole gym playlist. It's lit, right? I'd be in there cranking. Couldn't listen to it because my phone was dead. So that meant, crap, I have to listen to whatever they're playing. And I was like, Lord, please don't let it be some nonsense. But as all the music is playing, I noticed that no matter what song they played, and I don't know if that was just something the gym had purposely done, every song was some kind of massive hit. It didn't matter what decade, what era, what genre. It was like I knew all of the songs. And so like as the songs were playing, because these were like songs that are pretty collectively popular depending on when you were born or what you listened to. So it was like B-52's Love Shack, Cheryl Lynn, Got to Be Real, Rick James, Super Freak, Michael, Beat It, 50 Cent in the Club, Redbone, Come and Get Your Love, Mariah Carey, Fantasy, what else, TLC, Creed, Nelly, Hot in Here. Like, it was all these songs that were these massive hits, or these songs that people still remember like years later. And I was like, wow, that's interesting, because as I was hearing all these different songs, I could remember what I was doing as some of these songs first came out. Now, some of these songs were from before my time. However, again, that conversation of a collective experience. If they were out way before I was born, you often heard them on some kind of commercial, or you heard them at the store, or you heard them somewhere, so you still knew them. And because, again, the Music Network still played a lot of music videos and had a lot of kind of like historical music programs, you could still be familiar with a lot of music that was from before your time. And I was like, wow, I don't know if we really have a collective experience with music anymore. And I think it's bigger than just music. Like even when we talk radio, TV, or again, something as simple as going to the store, all of these experiences have changed. So when we talk about radio, right? Radio at one point was a lot more regional. You know, we go back a few decades. It was much more regional. Every region, city kind of did their own thing. We weren't in a space where 70% of the radio stations were owned by iHeart and another percentage was owned by Urban One and the rest were owned by another company. And then you have these nationally syndicated playlists where pretty much folks in the office say, these are the 20 songs that we're going to play in all of the cities across America for the next 6 weeks, and everybody better just enjoy them. Like, that wasn't quite the thing. Radio stations were a lot more privately owned, and so because of that, things were a bit more about the actual listener. So when people actually put in requests and stuff, you had the radio disc jockeys and everything like that try to meet those requests. So radio was a little bit more for the consumer, for the listener. And because everything was regional, every region was doing something different, and a lot of times what may have blown up in one region might inspire another region to catch on. And it's like, okay, well, this is blowing up in New York, so Philly is like, okay, well, we're going to kind of see what New York is doing because they're doing something. And then Chicago's like, oh, well, we heard this is kind of blowing up over here. And LA's like, hey, I just heard over in Houston, this is what's kind of jumping. And so everything kind of connects and it kind of pulls everything in together where artists have opportunities to really get that exposure. Now, some may say the nationally syndicated playlists work if you're an artist because, hey, now you're on this playlist that is going to be played all around the country that everybody's going to hear all the time. But here is the flaw. For people who are listeners or fans of music, they don't want to hear the same 10 or 20 songs every time they turn on the radio, and no matter what radio station they turn to, they're still going to hear one of these songs because half the stations are owned by the same company. That turns people off, and so now we're in a space where a lot of people have stopped listening to radio. So as far as the amount of listeners, radio, you know, the impressions and stuff are starting to go down because people have shifted into other outlets. You know, they make their own playlist through whatever streaming site they use, whether it's Tidal or Apple Music or Spotify, or they still use their own iPod or CDs or whatever they do. Some people like to listen to podcasts. Some people like to listen to talk radio. You know, some people, they just do their own thing. They don't even want to hear no music. We just ride in the car to silence, right? And so radio, in my opinion, has kind of shifted where a lot of people are turned off by it because they recognize that you can almost see straight through the corporate greed. You can recognize that radio is not really about what people want to hear. It's more so about who has the best negotiating power in the office, right? So that's radio. Then when we get to television. Now, television is unique because television outside of radio was always the biggest outlet for exposure for artists. Labels love to put their artists on different TV shows because they knew America was watching. So when we talk about television, in my opinion, the shared experience of television has changed. Let's go back to life before cable, when you just had the major networks, right? ABC, NBC, CBS, later down the line, Fox would be a thing, right? There was a point in time where before cable, the majority of America all watched the same thing because they only had 4 options, right? So you can take a show like MASH, and MASH had 105 million viewers for their series finale. And so think about it, when you had shows that were pulling in those kind of numbers, for a record label to get their artist on one of those shows was like striking gold, right? So as we come into the late 80s, going into the 90s, as cable has finally spread across the entire country and everybody has it now, even then, the shows on the major networks were still pulling in a lot of viewers. It was nothing for a show to pull in 30 million viewers every week. And so, again, for labels, they always wanted to get their artists on these different shows because, again, having somebody's favorite artist on a really popular sitcom or a drama or a morning show or a late night show, it was a great way for promotion for whatever song was out, whatever tour they were on, just keeping them as a household name where people kind of knew who all of these different people were. So it worked in everybody's favor, right? So that's kind of shifted in modern times because now we have so many outlets for consumption in regards to television. We're not all just watching cable anymore. A lot of us are sick of cable because we're tired of paying $250 for whatever stupid bundle they're trying to make you buy. And so people have either gotten rid of cable, some people keep cable, but a lot of people do the streaming sites. And all the streaming sites have something different. So some people do Netflix, some people do Hulu, some do Peacock, some do Paramount Plus, some do HBO Max, some do Apple TV, some do Disney Plus, some do BET Plus, some do, I think Discovery Plus is still a thing. Like there's just all of these different options, and so the idea of 105 million people watching anything isn't really existing anymore. And again, 105 million viewers, that's like some Super Bowl numbers, right? So now in modern times, a lot of shows sometimes don't even pull in a million viewers. And then you also have to think about people that do like DVR and record or stream later down the line or next day streaming. Like, it's just different. So artists being on, a television show doesn't always carry the same weight that it once did when more people were watching more of the same thing. So again, that conversation of a collective experience. This is not the era of when a Michael Jackson video is going to premiere, it's going to premiere on all the major networks at the same time. That's not really a thing anymore, right? And so that piece has changed, right? And then again, even when you just talk about something as simple as going to the store, right? Think about all the times when you go to the store and you hear a song and you're like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. Like, that's even changed for some people, because think about the pandemic when it hit. Some people never left the house again, right? They ordered their groceries online, they do DoorDash or Uber Eats, and whatever they need for the house, they go to Amazon. And so some people don't even have a reason to go to the store anymore. So the idea of constantly hearing songs that would be kind of collectively understood or collectively heard by the masses, that format and that landscape has changed drastically. And then when we even just talk about the music networks, something like a BET, a VH1, and MTV. Now, I'm one of the main people who has always said something like a TRL or a 106 in Park in modern times doesn't quite work, because back then, yes, people would sit and watch an hour and a half or 2 hours of a show to watch 45 seconds of their favorite music video to see if it made the top 10 countdown. In modern times, you can just go to YouTube and type the song in, and boom, you can watch the video as many times as you want. However, the one benefit that these networks had was they gave you exposure even when you weren't looking for it. The thing about YouTube is, yes, it's great, or even the streaming sites, it's great that you can go and look up and find an artist, but sometimes if you don't know that an artist exists, you don't know to look them up, right? And so think about, like, especially if you were somebody who went to school in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, think about a lot of times what was on the TV when you were getting ready. I know for me, I always had one of the music networks on, so while I was getting ready, there were always music videos playing. That was the perfect way to get exposed to a lot of the songs and stuff that were out. A lot of times when I discovered new music, it wasn't because I was purposely sitting there like, oh, I'm going to find something new. It was more so, hey, I'm cleaning the house, this is on in the background, and while I'm vacuuming, oh, wait, that sounds nice. What is that? And then you stop vacuuming, you sit down for a minute, turn the TV up, and okay, then you call your friend, hey, that's some song I just heard. That girl from En Vogue, Dawn, it's like her and the guy from Tony, Raphael Sadiq, and the guy from Tribe Called Quest. Yeah, they got a group called Lucy Pearl now. This is some song I just saw. It's called Dance Tonight. It's kind of dope. I think it's on that Love and Basketball movie soundtrack. Like, that's not really as much of a thing anymore. And so, again, just our collective experience in regards to consumption and how we're exposed to music has shifted. And so again, those networks did play a pivotal role in regard to music. But I want to go a little bit further with the networks because they played so much more of a role that I think we don't really appreciate today. I will say that there are some outlets out there in modern times, like especially with YouTube. People love NPR's Tiny Desk. I think that's a great way for people to get exposure, especially for vocalists, right? Terrell's show on YouTube, he does a really great job of highlighting, vocalists and artists that actually sing, right? Great outlets for exposure. When Versus was still a thing, that was kind of a cool way to kind of keep people in the loop. Versus got a little too bought out, so people aren't really checking for it. But anyway, going back to the music networks, one of the most important aspects about all of these music networks was that they didn't give the same thing. And in addition to that, there was variety in regards to what it was you could consume in relation to music. So it wasn't just going to be music videos. They were going to have different shows or specials that covered everything. Look at it almost the same way you look at an extended family going to a theme park, right? You got this big family of, I don't know, 15 people, they're going to a theme park. Not everybody's going to want to get on the same thing. You're going to have some of the kids that want to get on the roller coasters, but everybody in the family is not going to try to get on the roller coaster. Grandma might not want to go. She got a pacemaker, so a roller coaster might not be a good idea for her. Maybe she might do the bumper cars, but actually no, because if they hit the car too hard, she might not make it. So, grandma instead is going to take the toddlers, and they're going to go on the carousel with the horses, because that's nice and slow, and they go in a circle, right? Maybe some of the women in the group don't want to go on any rides where there's going to be water splashing, because they don't want to mess up their hair. But there's one aunt that went natural, so she don't mind getting her hair wet, right? And then there's going to be some people that want thrill rides. There's going to be some people that don't want to do no rides. They just going to hold all the bags and let everybody else go in. That's kind of like what happened with these music networks when it came to the choices and the options that people had in regards to what they could watch in relation to music. So yes, there were going to be shows like a TRL or a 106 in Park with countdowns, but they had other things. They were going to go behind the scenes with somebody on tour. So yes, this is Kurt Loder with MTV. We're backstage at the Up in Smoke tour, and Rough Riders are about to come out. And so you had all these different specials specifically following artists when they went on tour. You had shows that were more so rooted in history. So shows like Before They Were Rock Stars on VH1, or Behind the Music on VH1, or Ultrasound on MTV, or Biorhythm on MTV, there were so many different shows. What else? You had fun shows that more so just celebrated pop culture. So like a Say What Karaoke on MTV, or shows that really went into the life and the experience of the artist, like MTV Diary, right? Or people wanted to know how the music videos were made. So you had Access Granted on BET, or you had Making the Video on MTV. Or if you really just wanted to know a little bit more about music videos and their history, MTV had most expensive music videos ever created, and you could sit here and watch, and they would literally play the music video and play a list of all the expenses that went into making all these music videos, right? You had things like VH1 Divas, where again, it's a cross-generational show where you have a lot of the legends from the 60s and the 70s, you have a lot of the acts from the 80s and the 90s, and there were current acts in that moment, right? You had all these different specials and album specials when an artist came out with an album, and I don't know, it's Alicia Keys week on MTV. We're gonna just do all these little sit downs, or it's I don't know, Dr. Dre's finally come out with his follow up to The Chronic. Like, there's all of these different specials. There were MTV Unplugged. This is back when people were like, we don't think Mariah Carey can sing live, and she's like, I'm about tired of y'all. So you know what? Here's a whole MTV Unplugged. I wish y'all would shut up about that already, right? And so there's all these different things, and so again, music, there were so many options for people to consume, and so all of these networks just gave you so many different things about what it was with music, where again, this was like gold for labels and artists in regards to exposure, promotion, lots of different campaigns and stuff. And so I think because so many outlets no longer exist, even when we talk music, it is very, very hard to even have cross-generational appeal in modern times when it comes into breaking in a new artist, right? Because I think a lot of times the emphasis has really just been on marketing to, I would say, not even the 13 to 25 demographic, but more so the 13 to 21 demographic. It seems to be that labels are specifically only focusing on that core demographic. And so when we talk about, again, cross-generational, a perfect example, and this is such a cheesy example, but hey, it was a hit, right? We could talk about the Macarena, right? So it's the song, it's recorded in 93, right? The original version is recorded in 93. It's these two older men that record a version. And, it does a little something here and there. It's not really this hit at all, right? And so some radio person in Miami is like, I really like this song. They try to get the radio folks to play it. And before they do that, there's a remix that's put out. So there's a remix of the song that kind of has the same format to the version that would be a hit. And it's a little bit catchier. They have a more like electronic beat as opposed to the traditional one they had. So now it's kind of a little funky, right? But all the radio promoters are like, we have an English only policy. Y'all just not going to be on here singing no Spanish all day. Y'all going to have to mix it up. So they go and they do what you call the Bayside Boys remix. And that's the version most of us have heard, where, they're singing the hook in Spanish, and then you have the girls that are singing the verse in English, right? And so that version finally gets some radio play in Miami. Remember our conversation about what was happening regionally? It blows up in Miami, works its way up to Florida, and now Atlanta and New Orleans is like, hey, there's some song in Florida that's really blowing up called the Macarena, right? And so it just keeps spreading and spreading. And then the music video comes out, and now it's got national exposure, and it blows up, and it has a dance. Oh, it's all fun, and it's everything else like that. And so it becomes a song that, again, has cross-generational appeal. It's a song that appeals to more than just one demographic. It doesn't just appeal to 13 to 21 year olds. Because again, look at the constructs of the song. You have two older men singing. Automatically that kind of pulls in a different audience. And then again, it's been remixed. They have a fun video. And so younger crowds are into it. It's something that's universally appealing to multiple different demographics. And again, it has a little dance with it, right? And so it's something that a lot of people enjoy. And this song spreads. I mean, they're doing the Macarena at the Democrat convention. And you got all the wealthy politicians getting it in and all that crap, right? They're playing it at the graduations. They're playing it at the company Christmas parties. You know, it's at the school dance. It's at all these different public events. And so it's a song that has impact. It's a hit. It's #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 for 14 weeks. People were sick of the song by the time it finally dropped off the charts. But again, that conversation of when they said hits don't feel like hits anymore, this is kind of what they're talking about. And so I think, again, a lot of times with the labels, they've kind of forgotten about the fact that, hey, adults listen to music as well, right? It's not just about the teenagers and the young adults, but hey, the people in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, they still like music as well. And so a lot of times I think what happens is labels are so distracted by how quickly the impact of success can be when young people latch onto an artist, because I think a lot of times they look at like what happened with the teen pop explosion and how an act like NSYNC could sell 2.4 million copies of an album in 1 week, or Britney Spears could sell over 1 million copies in a week, or Backstreet Boys do the same thing, you know, or even like a 50 Cent when he first, well, when Get Rich or Die Trying came out, and you know, it sold 800 something thousand copies the first week and then sold more the second week. Like that quick impact, because again, when young people latch onto something and there's pandemonium, they go hard, right? So labels love to latch onto that because it's quick, instant gratification, it's quick money. And I think people always underestimate the buying power of the adult audience or the adult contemporary audience. The thing about the adult contemporary audience is that adult contemporary audiences are steady and consistent, and they help albums to sell over time or to keep people's name, you know, pretty much as a part of the public conversation. I know we're not really in the space where people are buying albums anymore, and it's more so streaming, but again, even when you want to talk about how that would translate into touring and everything, it's the adults that tend to have that kind of buying power. And so again, the idea of not really focusing on trying to create things that can be cross-generationally successful, I think, has been a flaw. Another example would be, you know, and I talked about this before on one of my In the News episodes, but you can talk about Chubby Checker the Twist, right? This is a song that goes to #1 in September of 1960 because it had a dance. Look, they were almost innovative before TikTok became a thing with all the dances making songs blow up. But you know, the Twist becomes this massive hit with the younger crowds, right? It's playing at all the little parties, young folks getting it in, they doing the Twist all day. Yeah, you know, that's the right? So they've been twisting forever, right? And so it's this massive hit. Then the adults discovered the song, and what happens? 2 years later, it goes back to #1 in January of 1962 because now the adults have discovered the song. And so, again, and it goes to #1 twice. So I think sometimes there's so much emphasis on only focusing on the younger demographic that they forget that, hey, older people still listen to music. And you know, just because somebody is 40 doesn't mean their ears just automatically close forever. They still want to consume music too. They want to have a good time as well. They want to cut up at the company Christmas party. They want to, you know, do a little two-step over at the cookout as well. So I think labels have spent so much time focusing specifically on a younger demographic and making everything all about social media that there have literally been demographics and pockets of listeners that have pretty much been abandoned almost, where, you know, they are not really a priority for labels. And I think that's a very, very foolish mistake because you're leaving out pockets of success and pockets of an audience that's going to definitely be the ones that go and buy tickets to concerts, and not just buy tickets, but be the kind of folks that have the money to pay for those VIP packages, be the demographic that's going to spend the big money, right? And again, like that, these are also the parents of those consumers, of the younger consumers. So I think, again, that idea of the cross-generational appeal is not really a thing anymore. So again, I think these labels really drop the ball when they only focus on that younger demographic and they totally ignore the adult consumer. Because again, if anybody saw my So What Happened episode with Tony Braxton, there's a portion in there where I talk about how one of the driving forces behind her success was that she had a grip on 3 different consumer bases, right? She had the pop collective that really enjoyed her, especially once Secrets came out and Unbreak My Heart was this massive hit. She had the pop demographic. She had the R&B demographic that was already rooted with her from the debut album. And she had, again, adult contemporary, that crowd, the whole Celine Dion, My Heart Will Go On, Elton John, Desiree You Gotta Be crowd. Like, Tony had all three of those on lock, and so she sold a lot of records really, really fast. So people kind of underestimate that demographic. But going back to touring was really interesting. Look at what's happening with touring right now, right? There's a lot of people on tour. This is a very oversaturated touring market where everybody you can think of has been on tour, because a lot of people had to postpone and cancel tours when the pandemic hit. Some people are playing catch up. Some people are promoting albums from 2 and 3 eras ago. Like, everybody is on the road, right? And so think about what's happening with the tours. It seems that really you have a lot of newer acts who are not doing too hot, right? They tried to do arena tours and they had to cancel dates because not enough tickets were sold, or if they didn't cancel the dates, they moved to a smaller venue, or if they had some hope and felt like, nah, we gonna sell these tickets, we can do it, and then it gets closer to the show and they didn't move to a smaller venue, so now you go to the venue and the whole upper section is curtained off. Everybody come on down, move in closer, bunching tight, y'all, come on together, right? So with a lot of newer acts, you've seen so many who are on these tours that are struggling. Meanwhile, they have streams galore, like tons and tons of streams, where you would think that they're out here moving serious numbers. But again, that idea where sometimes things are not what they seem, but because again, with streaming, there's not a real way to kind of validate what's organic, what's legit, and what is more so stand bases, just streaming on purpose to try to keep the numbers up. You know, it's a different day and age. So when you look at who's really having the success with tours, it's either what? The people who have a very dedicated fan base, even if they're more so underground, or it's the established artists that already have a track record for doing a bunch of great things. So, you know, you have, especially on these arena and stadium tours right now, like Drake is on tour. Drake ain't really my go-to for everything, but Drake has had 100 million, 50, 100,000 hits, right? So Drake is on some massive arena tour. SZA just wrapped a very successful arena tour. Now, she's somewhat of a newer artist, but she's kind of in two boats because she was really underground for a few years, so she had already been building that fan base. And when she finally blew up and, you know, had these songs that people connected with, and now she's back out and everything else like that, you know, she's had a very successful arena tour in modern times. You know, Janet, right? Janet just broke her own personal record in regards to revenue on this tour that she's been on. And what's interesting with Janet is Janet has not had a top 10 hit in, since 2001? Right? But because again, Janet has this collective of music that people love, they know they're gonna get a good show. She's an established artist that has a track record for being an excellent performer, and again, her music crosses multiple generations, and when you go to her show, it's gonna be a very diverse crowd from different backgrounds, age groups, everything. People went, and that woman sold out literally every single date of her last tour, right? You know, you have Taylor Swift, who was on tour, this big massive stadium, multiple nights in the same city tour, where again, Taylor's an interesting conversation because Taylor is somebody who, in my opinion, she emerged during the remnants of the old industry, but was able to be grandfathered into the new industry as far as how things have shifted. And because she already had a locked-in fan base that rolled with her, and she had the accolades for those who support her, as she transitioned from country to pop, she only got bigger. And so what she does has worked for her and her fans, so she has this massive tour that she's been on. Pink, of course, is on a stadium tour. People are going to pay to see Pink. Why? Because they know that she's going to strap up and go straight to the sky, right? And she's going to be flying all around, and her mic is going to be on. They're there for Pink, and there's all these artists that are on these massive tours. Beyonce is on again a massive stadium tour, and the thing about this tour is like it's almost like a whole movement. It's not even just people going to the show. You got people that are going over there dressed up, looking like Star Trek, Deep Space Nine. They got these metallic outfits, and it's a whole movement because people have bought into what it is she's presenting. And mind you, she came out with an album with no music videos, just the songs. You just got to shut up and enjoy. And so people are at the concerts, they got the outfits, they're buying, they got like that fan, the fan thing. And even as you see people like pay attention to what happens in each city when she does the everybody on mute challenge with Cuff It, right? And so even that's a thing where people are literally camped out on social media seeing which city's going to be able to stay on mute. Okay, people have bought into what it is she presents, and the reason these people are able to have the success that they have had on the road is because people know they're going to get their money's worth. They know they're not just going to go to some show and it's going to be some nonsense, because what's happening is a lot of these new acts freaking suck on stage. They're terrible. I'm sorry. A lot of them are just, God, who wants to pay for some of the nonsense that these labels allow these artists to go out there and do? I'm not even going to say the artist I'm thinking about, but there's one artist that works my nerves because when they get on stage, they go up there and use their library voice and act like they don't even want to be there. And I'm like, and you want people to pay $200 and $300 to see this act? All right, y'all just let anything slide. But again, that idea of people getting their money's worth. People will pay to see things that they believe in. This is why when Prince was alive, Prince could just say, hey, I'm doing 2 shows at the Tacoma Dome, literally a week before the shows, and they both sell out, right? This is why like a Michael Jackson could have 4.4 million people attend the Bad Tour. 4.4 million people. Like that's some small countries. That's a few different states, right? And then to top that, then you have the History Tour, 4.5 million people. And the History Tour didn't even come to the United States. Okay, so people know what is good for them or what it is that they connect with. You know, they like to support an artist that's going to give quality, where their music connects, their music does something to that listener. And not only is the music presented well, but again, they know how to perform. There's a musicality that's there. A lot of the new acts don't even have any musicality. Some of these folks be fighting the rhythm trying to rap. I'm like, what are you... Whew, I'm not even trying to sound like a hater, but it's really not the same. And this comes because, again, you know, we have that conversation of artist development, which is something that no longer really exists. And it's because the industry has just shifted in how they do things. Like, think about how important artist development was at one point. This is why artists ended up having quality songs and became good performers. And they had stuff that connected with audiences, because the labels were like, we're not putting you out until you're ready, right? And even if they put an artist out when they weren't ready, if things didn't go well, they go back to the drawing board and say, hold on, we're going to restructure this and try again, right? So, like, if you saw my So What Happened episode with Usher, we talk about how the first album came out, it didn't really do a whole lot. It didn't do as big as they wanted it to do, and you know, they put Usher back in the drawing board. Let's go on back and restructure and reimage. We're gonna let his voice go through the change. We'll let him get a little taller, put on a little bit more grown man weight, and we're gonna restructure everything he does. And then boom, here's the My Way project. And from then on, it's just a string of monster albums, 8701 and Confessions, right? And so artist development, letting an artist get into a space where they get better. And because people see the growth, people see how much effort has gone into the work that they're putting into their product, people are more willing to buy into what it is that they're offering. People are willing to go to the concerts. People are willing to keep it on the channel when they're performing. Now, I was just about to change it, but actually, oh no, that's Usher. Let me see what he's about to do, right? Artist development. Motown had a whole machine. The purpose of Motown when it came to, you know, developing their artists was to make them distinguishable from the average everyday person. Let's turn them into a superstar. So when you went through that machine, it wasn't just going to be you going to a vocal coach. You're going to go to a vocal coach. You're going to go to a choreographer. You're going to go to another person that's going to teach you how to conduct interviews. You're going to go to another person that's going to pretty much manage how you're going to dress and everything else like that. And you're never going to be seen stepping outside looking half crazy and unkept. Like, Motown had a whole movement with how they're going to make sure that all of their artists, when they were put out there, were going to be polished and have that superstar element. Labels definitely don't do that anymore, because now we've seen this trend where pretty much if somebody blows up on TikTok, they get signed and get thrown out there. As opposed to if somebody blows up on TikTok, the label signs the artist, works with the artist to kind of get them set up to go out there and then put them out. Instead, again, they blow up on TikTok and they get put out there. No artist development, they don't know how to perform, half of them can't sing live, and it's a mess, right? And so, again, the labels are trying to capitalize on the quickness and the instant gratification of, you know, social media, because it moves very quickly, and then people move on to the next thing a day later, right? Again, NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, both acts were pushed over in Europe before they were ever dropped off in the United States to blow up. They did all of the marketing and the testing in Europe to see, okay, how are they doing in Germany? Okay, all right, now I think they're ready for the big debut in the United States. Same thing with like a Justin Bieber. You know, they went into all of this development. Okay, it's a kid act. Great. We already know the little kids are going to just eat it up anyway, but let's make sure that we're going to at least give them something that has layers to it. This kid is going to be able to play instruments. He's going to be able to sing. He's going to be able to dance. Whitney Houston, same thing. Yes, she could always sing, but when we roll her out, we got to do it right. So yeah, we're going to have her appear on all of these different songs. She's going to sing backgrounds for different people. We'll let her sing on some of these Jermaine Jackson duets and everything, and then when it's finally time for the rollout, we'll do the rollout, and then boom, look how massive Whitney is. You know, even like Miguel, the R&B singer, like he gets signed in like 07. My first memory of Miguel was MySpace Music. He had a song called Dig, like D-I-G. He had that song. He had a song called Still. I remember hearing that all the time. So then fast forward to about 2010, I'm randomly at Love Nightclub, and they're like, everybody give it up for Miguel. I'm like, hey, that's the dude I know from, I used to follow his MySpace page, and now he's performing the All I Want Is You song, and then Sure Thing blows up, right? And so again, that idea of development. Development is what cements an artist's identity when it comes to how they're going to be portrayed in music. You know, that development is important, and labels no longer do that. And one of the other problems is so many of these labels have people working there that don't even like music. They're just there for the analytics and whatever numbers that they can crunch and stuff, because they've been brought on because apparently they're a good strategist. And so you have so many people working in the rooms that don't even know music. Their ear is not to the consumer. Their ear is not to the streets. Their ear is only to a bunch of nonsense, right? And so you have so many that have dropped the ball in regard to different decisions that were made with some artists that they chose not to sign, or artists that they did sign. And it's just like, y'all got so much nonsense going on. And so again, artist development is everything. And now you're seeing the end result of it with all of these new artists who apparently are, you know, the headliners of the modern era, and they can't even sell out amphitheaters, let alone arenas, let alone theaters, right? We're literally watching it now. So this is kind of where we're at. I think another challenge that affects what's happening in music and why it's so hard to break people in, everybody sounds the same. It is so hard to distinguish who is who, especially when you're just talking about production. Like when you talk about some of these rappers and these singers, so many of them use the exact same EQ filters and the different effects on the voices, where there's nothing distinguishable about their voice. And when you listen to the radio or you hear a song, you don't know if it's this artist or that artist or that artist until you actually look up the name, because they sound so familiar. It kind of reminds me of like when Designer came out with Panda and everybody thought it was a Future song right away, because it was like, okay, we get it, but you sound exactly like, you know, another artist that's already out with this very similar sound, you know. And this is kind of left field. It makes me think of even like a Chris Brown. One of the critiques Chris Brown always gets is people say all of his stuff sounds the same. My theory with Chris is not that his stuff sounds the same, but because he continues to use that same filter on his voice. That's a filter that was very popular in 2013, 2014, 2012, even some parts of 2015. So now in modern times, when he keeps coming out with all these different songs and he still has that same filter on his voice, people automatically associate it with that earlier era. And that's why a lot of people kind of dismiss some of his catalog and say everything sounds the same, when in reality, I think it's the effect in that filter that you're hearing on the voice that people just automatically associate with Chris. That's just my theory. But going back, you have so many artists that just all kind of sound the same. Labels are afraid to branch out. They will not let an artist grow. And so you have a lot of artists who have nothing distinctively unique about them. And so they end up in this pool of artists that are all kind of giving the same thing. And that's why so many of them don't catch on, because the consumer's like, I heard this a million times already. I'm not about to waste my energy even diving into this project. And then sometimes these people have great projects. And what happens is a lot of artists get signed. They have their own distinctive identity. And the label's like, okay, well, what you were doing was cool, but this is what we're going to have you do, because this is what the move is, right? And so artists don't even get a chance to grow, right? And so, and I think what sucks too is, again, there are so many great artists out there that most of us will never discover. You know what I mean? At least not in the realm where they're going to have the massive exposure and they get to be a part of a collective conversation. You know, they're going to have their diehard fans that stay in these different pockets, but there's so many great acts out there. But again, going back to what's at the record labels and who's in the boardroom, all right? Remember how I said at one point music had a really good balance of you know, that idea of meeting the bottom line and making sure the consumer is happy? In my opinion, again, I think right now the majority of the room is just the bottom line brigade. Like, there's not enough people who actually love music to kind of counterbalance and spread things out where, okay, yes, bottom line is important, but let's also talk about quality. Let's talk about what people want to listen to. Let's talk about what works. Let's talk about time and investment. Labels don't really want to do that because, again, time is money right now. And right now they're focused on return on investment. And so they're only going to jump into what they know works, which again is why they latch onto trends. And they will ride a trend until that trend dies out. Then when the trend dies out and they don't know what the next trend is, they're throwing things at the wall again, hoping something sticks, right? And so you've seen this thing where, again, labels keep going to TikTokers and influencers to, you know, get inspiration, which I think kind of is not always the best idea, right? Because now we have all of these hits that people only know 30 seconds of, right? And it's not to be shady and tear down any of those folks, but just recognize that we've had a string of songs that have become really popular in the last handful of years, and people only know one segment of that song because they heard it a million times through some kind of challenge or whatever, but then the song doesn't go anywhere else. The artist is not really able to book, you know, performances or anything. There's still no artist development, and you know, the label's figuring like, hey, well, TikTok needs to go ahead and do the rest of the job for us. And what I find interesting is labels should have already known that that wasn't going to be a long-term effect, because you could have looked at what was happening before TikTok. Think about a lot of the songs that were going viral on social media before TikTok, or even when TikTok was still Musical.ly, right? You like think about, and this is not to be shady to them, but think about like Hit the Quan, right? Hit the Quan was one of those songs. It had a popular dance. Everybody was jamming to it. But when is the last time you played that, right? you have all these songs that are for the moment, and the labels are trying to make these songs forever. And it just doesn't work like that because the songs are so replaceable. This is not to diss and take down what's out there, but again, like, even look at the structure of songs and how songs have gotten even shorter. Okay, artists were already complaining when they started having the radio formats and saying your song needs to be no longer than 3 minutes and 30 seconds, but preferably if you can keep it at 3 minutes, that would be a great thing. Now we're getting songs that are a minute and 40 seconds as full songs. Like, so it's so evident, like, right in the consumer's face that, yeah, it's not even about quality or anything. We're just trying to meet our bottom line. We know that if we can get enough of this out, you know, if this song is only, you know, a minute and 40 seconds and it loops, you can stream more of it more often and you can get a bit more ad revenue. All right, it'll do a little better on the charts and in the analytics, and in the algorithm. Like, that's where we're at. And so there's a whole lot of nonsense going on, right? And then to add insult to injury, a lot of these labels end up signing people who really aren't even artists. They don't even really want to be artists. They just want to be famous. And so you constantly hear their names all the time, and apparently they do music at some point. But you more so only hear about them because they're in some kind of drama, or they got some kind of beef with somebody, or something crazy happened and everybody's talking about it on social media. And it always makes you feel so bad for the people that actually want to be artists, and they have to take a backseat to these folks. Because understand too, for a lot of the people who have been trying to get signed to a major label, a lot of the labels are saying, well, let me see what your streaming numbers look like before we even have a meeting. You know, they, at this point, want artists to be able to market and promote themselves as well and gain some kind of internet traction and a following before they even consider having them come to a room. Because they're like, well, if you can't already make your own impact, we're certainly not going to spend the millions to do it. And so then you get that person who lives in Wichita, Kansas and works at the coffee shop, and they spent their last $800 working on this amazing album, and it's a beautiful piece of work. Maybe it could use some better mixing and mastering, but that's something a label could fix. And with the right promotion and the right team, they might actually be able to build a following. But the label is like, we're not even about to invest in it because, you know, in order for us to take you serious, you should have already had about 100,000 streams. So until you can do that, leave us alone. Like, that's literally the movement. And in addition to that, for artists that are already signed, you have a lot of artists where the label is telling them, we're not releasing anything until you have a viral moment on TikTok or a viral moment, you know, on social media. And so you have all these artists who have complained and said, yeah, sorry, I'd love to put this out, but the label's like, there's not enough buzz around you right now, so until you can do something that blows up on TikTok, your project or your album is kind of just sitting on the shelf. Like, that's the reality, because again, they've gotten rid of a lot of the A&R teams. Artist and repertoire is not really a thing at a lot of the labels anymore. They've just kind of gotten rid of it. And again, it's almost like you want the artist to do all the work. And so going back to the idea of the acts that aren't even really artists, they're just kind of obsessed with being famous. And these are the ones, like I said, that don't have any musicality. They don't really put a lot of effort into their craft. They just want to be the face of whatever movement and go to all the clubs and the promotional parties and hit the red carpet, but their talent is not there, right? It's interesting because, again, like, social media clout is not interchangeable with organic fans, and that's why you have some of these people who have 20 million followers, but again, their project comes out and, you know, it barely moves 15,000 units, and that's including pure sales and, you know, the SPS sales in regards to streams. People aren't even paying them any attention, right? Because again, it's just not interchangeable. And I think it also goes back to the fact that, again, they now love this idea of shock factor to try to push artists, right? This whole idea of making all these artists blow up on social media and then trying to push their music secondhand, right? Just imagine if this was 30, 40 years ago and a record label tries to tell Sade in order to release the album that they've been working on, you know, they're going to have to go viral. What is Sade going to do on TikTok? Okay, she has a potato farm at her house. She ain't doing nothing but minding her business and keeping quiet. She does not even do interviews unless she has something to say. So again, that idea of letting the artistry speak for itself is not really a thing because labels don't even believe in the artistry anymore. They just want the viral sensation and something really quick. And I think that's why so many of these artists come and go and so many burn out so quickly, because the labels just, you know, they don't know what to do with them, right? And the other thing is, labels are afraid to really work an album. They are so afraid to drop an album that may not necessarily have a strong first week, because if they feel like if the first week sucks, pull the plug on the project, that's it, right? And so we're now in a space where labels will not even take the time to work an album anymore or let an album build over time. I always like to reference Keisha Cole in this argument because, again, she's an example of someone where the label said, we're going to work this album until she catches on because there's something about her we believe in and we know that we can make her a star. And so a lot of people are first introduced to Keisha Cole from a song that was featured on the Barbershop 2 soundtrack. It sampled Luther Vandross' Never Too Much. Then we get I Changed My Mind. It has Kanye West production on it. It's not the song that quite blows up, but it does create some buzz. And then I Just Want It to Be Over comes out, and the album comes out, and It's actually moving rather slow. I Just Want It to Be Over isn't really moving the numbers that it wants to move. But you know what? The label is like, we're going to make this girl work. They sent her on radio press, and she's going all around the country doing radio interviews. They're putting Keisha wherever they can find her. And then they get fortunate, and they're like, hey, we have been able to secure BET, and they're going to let her do Access Granted for I Should Have Cheated, right? I Should Have Cheated comes out, and boom, we have some traction, right? Now we're getting somewhere. And then, of course, the follow-up single is Love. It blows up. And then the rest is history. Now she has, this string of hits that follows. Because, again, the label is like, we're going to make this work. Like, we know that we can turn her into something because there's something about her that's going to be able to connect with people. And so, boom, Keisha Cole blows up. Or even like a Paula Abdul, who's more of an example from the more so pop standpoint, where, again, she has all of these singles that they keep pushing that are not catching on. It takes 64 weeks before the Forever Your Girl album goes to number one. They come out with the single Knocked Out. It does a little something on the R&B charts, but it's pretty much ignored. Then she releases, It's Just the Way That You Love Me. Great dance video. And again, it's ignored. They like, ugh, please send us somebody else. Anybody but her. The radio programmers are tired of hearing about her, right? We don't need her. We got other people. And then they come out with Straight Up. Straight Up blows up, and then finally there's interest. And now it's like, okay, they actually go and re-release The Way That You Love Me and do a separate video. And, Opposites Attract and Cold Hearted Snake and Forever You're Girl and all these singles. And, this is an album that sells like 17 million copies over time. And, she has a nice little quick run. So again, when labels actually put the effort and try and push an artist, it makes a huge difference. But I think one of the reasons why we're not seeing labels really have that much effort for one artist is because there aren't that many labels anymore. A lot of the labels have folded or they've merged into other ones, and so there's only a handful of labels. And those labels have these massive rosters with so many artists. And I think one of the labels that a lot of fan bases just want to fight all the time is RCA, because it seems like everybody and their mom is signed to RCA, and everybody who's signed is struggling. Like, there are some who are doing okay, but like RCA is like, it's just like, I don't know, it's the Walmart of record labels. They got everybody and everything. You know how Walmart has everything? RCA got everybody. And so, and one of the challenges that sucks with a lot of artists that sign to some of these major labels is a lot of times when a label doesn't do anything with them, they won't even release the artist from their contract so that they can find a viable label that will work with them. Because a lot of the labels, their fear is if we let this artist go, they might get signed to another label and blow up, and then we're going to be mad. So we would rather just hold on to this artist forever, and then, finally when they're of no use to us and we know that they're not a viable threat in regards to success at another label, we'll let them go. I always think of Sherry Dennis. Now, Sherry Dennis was an act that was signed to Bad Boy. She sat on Bad Boy for almost a decade before her album came out, right? And when the album came out, it was not really promoted. In my opinion, I think it could have been mixed a little bit better, but it was actually a pretty decent album. But again, by the time it had come out, it didn't really do much. And so by the time, it's all said and done, now she's like, I'm going to say she's close to either her early 30s or like maybe 29-ish. And that's still relatively young, but for an artist that's trying to go and make major moves in the industry, we know that this is a very ageist music industry, right? If you're not already established by a certain age, it is really hard to get that big push. There are some exceptions to the rule where there are some people who blow up years later. So somebody like a 2 Chainz, blew up, years later, right? So there are some people who break that mold, but labels love to kind of do that. They would rather just hold on to an act, right? Rather than, let them go free. So there's all these artists that are tied up in litigation and tied up into these bad contracts. We remember what happened with JoJo and Black Round Records and how, she got signed when she was really, really young and, came out with 2, successful projects. And then after that, they just had her just sitting there, right? And she kept fighting and clawing to try to get out of this contract, and they would not let her go. Fortunately, she had a really great internet following, and she's been able to still, have relative success. And I think what's happening with music is, too, there's a conversation to be had about, do you want to sign with a major label and deal with the nonsense, but hey, at least you'll have massive exposure, and yeah, you'll probably be in some kind of 360 deal, and they're going to own everything you do, even things that have no relation to music, they get a chunk of that too. So do you want to go that route, or do you want to go the independent route? And you're not going to have the same kind of exposure and the same resources and everything, but if you are successful, you will have a pretty penny, right? You'll have you'll get a nice payout, right? And so that's kind of the challenge that you're seeing artists have to battle with, which I think, kind of sucks because it just shows that the industry's changed. And I think there's a conversation about what is success in 2023 with music. In my opinion, personally, I think that comes from touring. I think touring is kind of the measurement of success right now for artists, because streaming, in my opinion, the threshold for streaming changes every other day as far as what is success. And then Billboard changes their rules every other week anyway in regards to what's technically a hit. And so to me right now, the only viable way to see if people are really rocking with artists is what do their tours look like. It doesn't mean they have to do a stadium or they have to do a whole arena, but you know, if they have a steady following, you know, are their shows selling out? Whether it's at a smaller venue that only holds 1,200 people or if it's a venue that holds 50,000. You know, because again, with streaming, we don't know what's legit, especially in this era where you have people that have the streaming farms, right? Where there's just rooms with hundreds of devices that purposely stream artists. And so yeah, sometimes you see these articles and it'll say this artist streamed 1 billion blah 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 blah, and then you got to be realistic and recognize that a lot of that sometimes isn't even organic and it's not even real people. It's machines and computers, right? And so it's chaos, right? It's a whole lot of nonsense going on. As far as the actual music is always going to be a subjective conversation as far as like, you know, what's good and what's not. But I will say, in my opinion, I feel like music has gotten so much darker. I think brighter music always appeals to people. When music is very bright and warm and pulls people in, it can be very successful. But I think, and this might just be a reflection of the time that we're living in my opinion, music has become very, very dark. In addition to being uneventful, so it's not even really pulling in people the same way. People like to just latch on to what they're already familiar with and what they've already appreciated or grown up with. And so I could talk about this all day, but this video is already probably more than an hour at this point, so I'm going to get off my soapbox. But yeah, I just think these labels, the ones who are stressed out about, you know, what's happening, it's kind of like y'all saw all of this, what was going to happen, and y'all played into it because, again, y'all were so pressed about the bottom line that you let the quality, you know, fall by the wayside. You let the musicianship and the artistry and all that take a backseat to the business. And instead of rather, you know, having somewhat of a balance, because like I said, I get it, it's a business. There's going to have to be some strategy and element that's going to bring return on investment. I 100% get that. But it's like they just pulled the plug from so much in order to just keep the money flowing. And now we have, you know, this collective of artists that are not even really what it is that people want. And then you have all these other artists that are amazing, that nobody's ever heard of, that you have to dig through the trenches of the internet to find, that, you know, you gotta get somebody gotta recommend to you from some random, you know, house party you were at where you heard a song, you're like, what's that? It's like, oh, it's this indie guy that's from Nova Scotia that we heard of, you know. And so like that's music right now. So, you know, we'll see how this all unfolds. Like, I think eventually music will somehow reset itself, God willing, and things will get a lot better. But I just think it sucks right now to be an artist in modern times. And I think that's why so many people are latching on to a lot of the artists that are a bit more established, or what you call the legacy acts. You know, they may not be selling what they once sold, or they may not be getting the massive hits they once got. But when it comes to tours and everything else, people flock to support. And I think that's because those artists have given people something that they wanted. And once the labels get back to that space of giving the consumer and the listener what it is they want, as opposed to what they think is just going to bring in a quick dollar, I think that's when you'll see a shift in the industry. Anyway, I'm out. Share your 2 cents. Subscribe.